Welcome to a presentation on God, the Metaphysical Precondition. My name is Llewellyn Pinaar, and I'm doing this presentation for Systematic Theology 501, Prolegomena and Bibliology. Now, when we speak of Prolegomena, uh, we have to know, or it is good to know, that Prolegomena is the introduction to theology. It deals with the necessary preconditions for doing systematic theology. Everything I'm mentioning in the slide comes from Norman Geisler's Systematic Theology, Volume 1, under the Prolegomena section. Now, this slide deals with God, the metaphysical precondition, but Prolegomena also deals with miracles, revelation, logic, meaning, truth, exclusivism, language interpretation, hagiography, and also method, looking at what we need to know about these preconditions that we then go on to do theology. But why are preconditions important in the first place? Well, a precondition makes possible what is based on it. Uh, for example, the precondition for two human beings to communicating with each other minimally include that there is a mind capable of sending a message. That would be me speaking, and then there is a mind capable of receiving a message, which would be you watching this video. But then there is also a common mode of communication, like language, shared by both persons, so that we can understand one another. So dealing with the metaphysical precondition, or God, the metaphysical precondition, let's look at what is the definition of metaphysics. Metaphysics literally means beyond physics or beyond the physical. It is the study of being or reality. It is the study of being, as opposed to studying being as physical or physics, or being as mathematical. Metaphysics is often referred or is often used interchangeably with ontology, being, or the study of being, the study of ontology. Going from that, the existence of a theistic God is the foundation of Christian theology. If God of traditional Christian theism does not exist, then logically all theology crumbles down. And attempting systematic theology without the superstructure of traditional theism is like building a house with no foundation, or a house with no frame. The significance of metaphysics is that theism is the metaphysical precondition for evangelical theology. It is fundamental to everything else, being the framework within which everything else has meaning. So it makes no sense to speak about the Bible being the Word of God unless there is a God. It is meaningless to talk about Christ as the Son of God unless there is a God who can have a Son. And miracles as special acts of God are not possible unless there is a God who can perform these special acts. In fact, everything in evangelical theology is based on the metaphysical foundation of theism. Evangelical theology implies a certain understanding of reality, and there are many views about the world that are incompatible with the claims of evangelical thought. We will look at that shortly. For example, evangelicalism believes that God exists beyond this world and that he brought this world into existence. It also embraces the belief that this God is one eternal, infinite, absolutely perfect personal being. And the name given for this view, that God created everything else that exists, is theism, that God created all, as opposed to atheism that believes that there's no God at all, or to pantheism that believes God is everything and everything is God. But all other worldviews, including pantheism, deism, finite godism, and polytheism, are incompatible with theism. So therefore, if theism is true, then it means all other worldviews are false, since the opposite of true is false. Theism and opposing worldviews, these are the seven major worldviews that exist today. There are some other, but these are the seven main ones, which is theism, atheism, to pantheism, to panentheism, deism, finite godism, to polytheism. And if these are not making sense to you yet, hold on to your horses, because I'm going to share just a little bit about these before we move on. There are seven major worldviews, as I've mentioned, and each one is incompatible with the other. That is where we get into the prolegomena of exclusivism, that only one can be true. One being true excludes the others from also being true. So logically, only one worldview can be true. The others must be false. So let's look at theism. Briefly explain theism just now, but theism is the worldview that says the physical universe is not all that there is. There is an infinite personal God beyond the universe who created it, sustains it, and acts within it in a supernatural way. He is both out there and in here. So traditional Judaism, Christianity, and Islam hold to this view. Now, I'm not saying that Judaism and Islam is untrue, but they also view God in this way. Atheism simply believes that no God exists beyond or in the universe. Pantheism believes that God is the universe. He is everything exists as one. For the pantheist, there is no creator beyond the universe. Rather, creator and creation are two different ways of viewing one reality. That God is the universe and the universe is God. Panentheism is that God is in the universe. God is in the universe as a mind is in the body, meaning that the universe is God's body. Deism believes that God is beyond the universe, but not in it, meaning that deism means that God created the world and he doesn't interfere in it. It's like theism, but without miracles. Finite godism is a finite God exists beyond and in the universe. So that this God of finite godism is a limited God in his nature and power. So polytheism believes that there are many gods beyond the world and in it, just simply believing that there are many gods. There are two ways of looking at this. It's a pluralism versus monism, and I'm going to explain a little bit about that. But reading the definition is that pluralism, as opposed to monism, holds that more than one being exists, meaning God and what he created God and creatures. While monism asserts that all reality is one, like pantheism, and that there is only one being. Pluralism, by contrast, believes that there are many beings in existence. God is an infinite being, and he created many finite beings that are not identical to him, though they are dependent on him. Also from Norman Geisler, Systematic Theology, Volume 1. Theism affirms that at least one finite being and one infinite being exists. Logically, then, if theism is true, then so is pluralism. But in the other way around, it does not mean that theism is true because pluralism isn't true, because other forms of pluralism like deism, finite godism, and polytheism are not true. So we don't argue from pluralism that theism is the truth. We argue from theism that pluralism is true. So if theism is true, then it means all other worldviews are false, since the opposite of true is false. But monism, just to clarify it, is that all reality is one. There is only one being that exists, and there is no real distinction between the creator and the created. Platonism, Platonism, Aristotelianism, and Thomism are alternatives to monism, but some fail along the way. So Thomism believe that things differ by absolutely non-being. So you have being and non-being. Things that differ by non-being, in short, differ by absolutely nothing, and to have no difference is to exactly be the same. Thus, it fails against monism. Platonism, things differ by relative non-being. Plato is the father of this view. What something is determined by what it is not. Like this, so pen is a pen in the way that it is not this wire and it is not this iPad. So then we can argue that the pen is not the wire, it is not the iPad, but things, although they differ in form, they still have existence. Their being in that it exists does not differ, and if they all collapse, they become the same thing. Hence, monism wins against Platonism in that argument. But looking at Aristotelianism, Aristotle being the father of this view, is that things differ as simple beings. He found differences in the beings itself, and Aristotle argued that there is a plurality of 47 or 55 beings that separate from one another in their very being. But this view falls short, that these beings cannot be related to one another and they are completely diverse from one another. But how do they differ in their pure form, in their being, what they are? If there is no difference in their simplicity, then they are identical. So again, monism wins. But then we come to Thomism. Thomas Aquinas is the father of this view. Things differ as complex being, and I'm going to break it down as much as I can. It is saying that all finite beings that are created, that is us human beings, creatures, the the world that is created are composed in their very beings. Only God is an absolute simple being. Being and there can be only one such being, which is God. There can be other kinds of finite beings, and these beings can differ in their very being because there can be different kinds of beings, meaning God is infinite. All creatures that God created are finite. God is the uncaused cause, and we'll look at that at the cosmological argument that follows, that God is the uncaused cause. He is pure act, and creatures are caused, their act and potency. Finite beings have limited potentiality. In all creatures, their essence, what they are, is distinct from their existence. But God's essence and existence are identical, meaning that God's essence is his existence. And there cannot be two absolutely simple beings. God exists in and of himself. So therefore, God and creation are two different beings. And therefore, Thomism wins over monism. The so Thomas' argument for pluralism makes theism possible, but only sound arguments for God's existence make theism viable. And we're going to look at four arguments for God's existence. It is the rational basis for theism. And the four arguments for God's existence, it is the cosmological argument, the teleological argument, the ontological argument, and the moral argument. So let's look at these. Under the cosmological argument, you find two arguments, the horizontal and the vertical. The horizontal argues from the to point of origin, in a sense of when the world was created or came into existence, where the vertical starts from where we are now. We are existing. So, so two horizontal arguments goes like this: everything that had a beginning had a cause. The universe had a beginning, therefore the universe had a cause. Another way of arguing this is that an infinite number of moments cannot be traversed. If there were an infinite number of moments before today, then today would never have come, since an infinite number of moments cannot be traversed. But today has come. Well, I'm sitting here in my Mauser jam, and you are watching this video because today has come. Hence, there were only a finite number of moments before so today. In example, a beginning of time, and everything with a beginning had a beginner. Therefore, the temporal world had a beginner, a cause. Now, looking at the vertical argument, there are four arguments that I would like to go through. Whatever exists but could not exist needs a cause for its existence. Since the mere possibility of existence does not explain why something exists, the mere possibility for something is nothing. In example, nothing. But nothing cannot produce something. And therefore, something necessarily exists as the ground for everything that does exist but cannot exist. In short, it is a violation of the principle of causality to say that a contingent being can account for its own existence. The vertical form of so the cosmological argument, as I've mentioned, begins with the present existence of the cosmos and insists that there must be a current necessary being causing it. Another argument that we can use is that if everything were contingent, then it would be possible that nothing existed. But something does exist. Example, I'm here, I exist, you are there, you exist. And its existence is undeniable. For I have to exist in order to be able to affirm that I do not exist. Some circular reasoning. Thus, if some contingent being now exists, a necessary being must now exist. Otherwise, there would be no ground for the existence of this contingent being. An argument from to change is that whatever changes passes from a state of potentiality for that change to a state of being actualized. That is, all changing beings have actuality and potency in their very being. If not, then all change would involve annihilation and recreation, which is impossible without a cause. Since nothing cannot produce something, but no potentiality can actualize itself any more than the potential for steel to become a skyscraper can actualize itself into a skyscraper. We cannot just throw a pile of material and then it becomes something out of nothing. No, it needs a cause. So if no potency can actualize itself, and yet at least one being is actualized, then ultimately there must be something that is pure actuality. Otherwise, there would be no ground for why something now exists that has the potential not to exist. Another form of the vertical cosmological argument begins with the present dependence of every part of the universe, that every part of the universe is right now dependent for its existence. We are not just floating in space without anything holding us, that we are dependent on God for our existence. So every part of the universe is right now dependent for its existence. If every part is right now dependent for its existence, then the whole universe must also be right now dependent for its existence. And therefore, the whole universe is dependent right now for its existence on some independent being beyond itself, which is God. Then we look at the teleological argument, the argument from design, that all design imply a designer. If I hold this to Pena again, we can assume that it is created. Someone designed it, and that there is a great design of the universe. Therefore, there must have been a great designer of the universe. If the universe exists, it implies that there's a designer behind it. Since every watch has a maker, and since the universe is exceedingly more so complex in its operation than a watch, it follows that there must be a universe maker. To quote from Alan Sandage, the world is too complicated in all of its parts to be due to change alone. I am convinced that the existence of life on Earth, with all its order in each of its organisms, is simply too well put together. The more one learns of biochemistry, the more unbelievable it becomes unless there is some kind of organizing principle and architect for believers. Then the ontological argument, it is the argument from being that, and it goes like this: God is by definition an absolutely perfect being. Existence is a perfection, therefore God must exist. If God did not exist, then he would be lacking one perfection, namely existence. But if God lacked any perfection, then he would not be absolutely perfect. And God is by definition an absolutely perfect being, therefore an absolutely perfect being, which is God, must exist. If God exists, we must conceive of him as a necessary being. But by definition, a necessary being cannot not exist. Therefore, if a necessary being can exist, then it must exist. And then the last argument for God existence is the moral argument. That is, the moral law implies a moral lawgiver. There is an objective moral law. Therefore, there is an objective moral lawgiver. Now, moral law is not herd instinct. Moral law cannot be a social convention. Moral law is different from the laws of nature. Moral law is not human fancy. In the injustice and the evil in the world does not disprove a moral lawgiver. It actually highlights that we know that there is an ultimate right and an ultimate wrong. Rather than disproving a morally perfect being, then the evil in the world presupposes an absolutely perfect standard. We do not rest our whole case for God on any one argument alone. Each argument demonstrates that I've given a different attribute of God along with his existence. These arguments, such as the cosmological argument, does not prove a theistic God in itself. There are other concepts of God besides theism, worldviews mentioned earlier, but these other concepts cannot be identified with a theistic God. Theistic God is the only God that can exist. Let's look at these theistic arguments that I just mentioned. Let's look at theism versus finite godism. That God must be infinite into contrast with finite godism. Since, per the cosmological argument, every finite being needs a cause, hence, the cause of all finite things must not be finite. Theism versus polytheism is that the uncaused cause of theism is distinct from the many polytheistic gods, for there cannot be more than one unlimited existence as such. There is only one unlimited cause for all limited existence. Then we can look at theism versus pantheism, that says that pantheism affirms that an unlimited and necessary being exists, but denies the reality of limited and finite beings. Theism versus atheism, the uncaused cause of theism cannot be identical with the material universe, as many atheists believe. As ordinarily conceived, the cosmos or material universe is a limited and spatio-temporal system. It is, for example, subject to the second law of thermodynamics, which says that things are running down. But an uncaused cause is unlimited and not running down. Theism versus panentheism is that panentheism affirms that God has two poles, that he has an actual pole and he has a potential pole, but God cannot be subject to limitations, to compositions or spatial temporality, since he is unlimited in his being. Then lastly, theism versus deism. Since the universe is dependent in its being, it needs something independent on which to depend at all times. So the universe never ceases to be dependent or so contingent. The universe is dependent on God. And I want to thank you for watching this presentation. May God bless you. And I hope this information helps you to know how to defend the faith and argue on a metaphysical level for God's existence. May you be blessed, and thank you for watching.